Hello, and welcome to the Total Mental Performance Podcast, the one and only mindset podcast dedicated to helping fitness entrepreneurs and coaches master their mindset, giving you insider access to industry leaders around their psychology, their campfire stories, and the mindset required to be successful in this business. I'm your host, Kieran O'Neill, mental performance coach and founder of Total Mental Performance, the world's fastest growing specialist mindset service dedicated to the fitness industry. So, without further ado, let's lean in and listen. Welcome to the Total Mental Performance podcast. I'm your host, Kieran O'Neill, and this is where we interview high performers on their mindsets, both during peak periods, but also those dark times. Today, I am super excited. We have one of my heroes, and without underplaying it, I could honestly say she saved my life. We have Hazel Gale, former kickboxing world champion, therapist, author, tech entrepreneur, and also ultimately just an all-round superwoman. Where do I even start? If I start with a story, so I actually called Hazel out of the blue. I just come off the England boxing team. I had an eating disorder. I was binge eating all of my food, going through periods of starving myself, binge eating, throwing up. It was a really quite honest, dark period. There was depression within that. I didn't leave the house for 2 weeks. I almost tried to take my own life, driving down the motorway at 100 miles an hour. I was in a really bad spot, and I didn't know where to go because you don't really talk about this stuff with friends and family back at that time anyway, for me and my background. And I was trying to find a male therapist. As a young guy, I thought, no, only a man could understand me, and I couldn't find one. And it was really quite a difficult period. So I was like, okay, not only do I want a man therapist, I want a man therapist that knows boxing. There's none. I think the latest research I looked at on one organization, 74% of all of their therapists were female. And then on another one was 80% of those therapists were female, which is really interesting. And I wonder if that's a blocker stopping men from doing what they need to do and reaching out for their help. So I was looking, I couldn't find anyone. And then I came across Hazel, and Hazel was a former kickboxing world champion. So I guess my insecure ego at the time was like, okay, I can listen to her. She can teach me a thing or two. She knows how to fight. She knows how to punch people on the head. Great. She's going to help me get back onto the Olympic trial or help me win a world title or whatever. So I called Hazel, and that call was probably one of the biggest changes and one of the biggest journeys of discovery that I've ever been on. She helped me understand, okay, well, this eating disorder stuff, that wasn't really what was going on. There was something a lot deeper than that. She helped me go to some really dark places for me in my personal experience, in my childhood, in moments of my life, and gave me not only just a toolbox of how to deal with these things and pull myself out of the hole, but actually just a completely life-changing perspective on my idea of self and who I can be within this world. And she's seen me go for a couple of evolutions from, a former England boxer to a software sales guy in central London. Actually, she's inspired me to go on and become a mental performance coach and launch Total Mental Performance and do the work what I do. So honestly, Hazel, I appreciate it's a big spiel, but I don't know where I would be without you. So thank you. You genuinely saved me and changed my life.
You're going to make me cry.
Yeah. Morning. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you for the amazing introduction.
Yeah, it was really. That's all I can say, Hazel. Life-changing work. I don't think I'd be here without you. So, enough of the soppy stuff. What do you do? What are you doing today?
Today I'm doing this, and then I'm getting going on some of the app work that I'm making at the moment. So that's sort of been you also have seen me, I suppose, go through a few evolutions in the years that we've known each other. And the most recent one is working on 2 different wellness apps, which I love. So that's what I'm doing today. And I'm guessing I'm not going to go into detail about my daily plans. Do you want to know, like, sort of my background to prep the rest of it and make it make sense?
Yeah, sure. What's your story?
Okay, so as you mentioned, I was a world champion in kickboxing, but then I moved into boxing. So we were actually on the boxing scene at the same time for for a period. But before that, I've been all over the place. My life has sort of meandered. One of the things that I've stayed true to the whole way through my life, for better and worse, is to follow my nose into the things I find most interesting. So, over the course of my existence, I have gone from being a jazz singer to being an artist and sort of dabbling in graphic design. And then I moved into hospitality actually for a long time, and then kickboxing and then boxing. But I burnt out horribly during boxing, which was bound to, boxing was likely to be the one that would cause me to do that because, of course, the exertion and the extra stress. But I think I was bound to burn out, whatever I was doing, because I had completely the wrong mindset. Even though I was good at following my nose and listening to what I was interested in, what I was terribly bad at was feeling my feelings, being honest about my fears and doubts. And I just built up this enormous mask, like an armor, basically, to avoid being exposed as not good enough, all the normal boring stuff. And in particular for me, it was about weakness. Like, I really didn't want anyone to see me as weak in any way. And so fighting was kind of like the perfect thing for me to do, in that it could make me into this, like, genuinely into a warrior woman who goes out to fight every day. But at the same time, it was the most frightening thing to do because, as you well know, the risk with boxing, the vulnerability of standing there on your own, in front of an opponent, in front of an audience, and risking getting winded or knocked down is the most frightening and humiliating possibility, really. So the stress of that was too much. And I burnt out. I don't actually know when it started. I think around 2009, and it lasted years. And it left me in a very anxious, very depressed, very dissociated state. I was completely incapable of tuning into my emotions by that point because they were too big and too frightening. I can say now, looking back, that I was having multiple panic attacks, small ones, but multiple panic attacks daily. And I just didn't even realize that's what it was. I just thought there was something wrong with my body. So I was constantly looking for the supplement or the doctor who was going to be able to fix me. And of course, none of them could. Eventually, I found therapy, and begrudgingly, I started looking at where I was going wrong psychologically. And just as you said earlier, that was the most important and the most transformative point in my life, when I conceded to the fact that I needed to look at this. And then, it quickly turned from a begrudging recognition that I needed to do something into fascination, because it's such an enjoyable, fascinating journey to work out what's going on in your head. It's like astrophysics or something. It's different to what we're used to. So anyway, that's how I got into therapy. I juggled therapy and boxing for a couple of years, and then I left boxing behind after a pretty kind of what's the word I'm looking for? There was a real aha moment for me in my penultimate fight, when I realized that I didn't really need it anymore. And ironically, that came at the same time as realizing that I believed in myself in that area. So this was 2013, sorry. And I was warming up for the national title in boxing. It was the last year that the women and men's competition was separate. So we were in this sort of kind of scuzzy Essex club. But it was a big sort of, it might have been a hangar or something. I don't remember where it was. And I walked out to fight that day, and I just felt this weird sense of peacefulness. It was bizarrely different. Instead of just being in panic and tunnel vision, I walked out and I was connected to the room around me. The room felt weirdly kind of emotionally quiet that day. The way I describe it in my book is that it was like the crowd had been hushed by a crisp layer of freshly fallen snow. That wonderful muted silence you get with snow. That's what it was like. And obviously, objectively, it was actually loud. But I think it was just my emotions were quiet, because I wasn't screaming and I wasn't trying, on the inside, trying to run away from the fight. And instead, I just had this sort of sense that I was going to be okay. Like, I've got this. But here was what was interesting. Like, this wasn't a pumped up, arrogant, I'm definitely going to win because I'm the best feeling. It was a quiet knowing that if I did win, I deserved the victory. And that I had the skills, and it was about going out there and just having the fight. And that for me was profoundly different. when I fought that day, I was in flow. I was in my body. I was focused on what was happening. I was paying attention, rather than being off in some other world of doubt. I was in front of my opponent. And when my hand was raised that day, for the very first time, I felt a real surge of emotion. And I always say that I don't know to this day if it was happiness or pride or just a good old-fashioned sense of achievement, but it was new. Every win up until that point, I'd actually hung my head and averted my eyes, because I felt shamed. I felt ashamed of winning because I didn't feel I deserved to win. I didn't feel I deserved to have my hand raised. On that day, I was able finally to own the victory. And that was amazing. And like I say, ironically, it meant that I then walked away from boxing after that. I left boxing behind pretty peacefully. I had one more fight, but it was just, I didn't need it anymore because I didn't need to prove myself anymore in that way. And, I haven't looked back since.
It's amazing. And can you run into then how you've built an incredibly successful therapy practice? I remember working with you and having to really make sure I had all my sessions booked. And even today, sometimes I have to wait a couple of months just to see you. So could you run through that period of where you managed to build a successful therapy practice, and then where you've now gone on to with the tech work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I went full-time therapy after quitting boxing, but by that point I'd been working part-time for a couple of years, I think, maybe even longer. So I had a client base, and people always ask me how you get clients, because one of the hardest things as a therapist to build up a reliable client base and get to the point where you can depend on the money that's coming through. I don't really know how I did it. A lot of it's referral, and a lot of it was writing articles. So actually, that's probably the most important thing. If I wasn't with clients, I was writing articles, and I was doing that partly because I love writing and I love the research that went with it as well, and partly because it was a way of getting my face out there as a possibility for people. And that of course led to me writing the book, which got published. I wrote a book called The Mind Monster Solution, which it starts with the story that I just told you, and it moves through my experience of what I was doing wrong to burn out, what I did to claw my health back, and then how I changed it from that point forward. So I published that in 2018. And off the back of that, anyone who's written a book will tell you that your life totally changes when you write a book in ways you don't realize are going to happen, because people reach out to you who never would have come across you before. And one of those people for me was a woman named Ellie Demanchesko, who is a tech entrepreneur based in Bulgaria at the moment. And we started making an app called Betwixt, which has literally just launched. We've just launched the first 5 chapters of it. It's an interactive choose your own adventure story, a digital one, which helps you make sense of yourself. So it's basically a tool for self-reflection and self-awareness building, and it's completely magical and out there, and we love it. Shortly after starting that, I was approached by another brilliant woman called Kim Palmer, who runs Clementine App UK, which is a women's wellness app that uses hypnotherapy, cognitive hypnotherapy, to help women turn a sense of I can't into a sense of I can, essentially, which means we tackle anxiety and confidence and all sorts of things like that. And so I started working on these 2 apps at the same time, which was a big ask, along with my clients, but it's been totally possible with some really important boundary setting. And that's where I am now. So now I'm in that world of working in those 3 jobs. Technically, I'm still coaching boxing as well, but right now during lockdown, that hasn't been happening.
Wow. And just think about the series of evolutions that you've been through, and how I think change is really hard because we often have to say goodbye to parts of ourselves that no longer serve us. And then it's in those little transition periods where you kind of feel that resistance. And the way that you explain it, it's like, yeah, I kind of got here, but I suspect in those little gray areas in between, it's almost like childbirth syndrome, where insofar as you forget how hard it is to actually give birth, and the pregnancy and whatever you remember is that beautiful moment. I've never given birth. I don't think I ever will. But from mothers I've spoken to, apparently childbirth syndrome is a thing. So looking at those transition periods, which of those would you say was the hardest?
Definitely the burnout was the hardest. It wasn't really, it was kind of a transition period. I went back to boxing after that. It wasn't a change necessarily. in terms of my career at that point, other than the fact that I started working as a therapist alongside the boxing. But it was definitely the hardest moment for me. The rest of it wasn't. I didn't find the transition periods hard, because for me, I don't know, I'm a doer, a worker. I'm happy when I'm building stuff. It doesn't matter how successful the stuff is. It doesn't matter, if it turns into something or not. I just like the process of building it, or writing it, or whatever I'm doing. So those transition periods are fine for me. I'm also not nervous about money. I never have been. That's probably because I'm lucky enough to have come from a financially stable family, so I don't really, have grounding in a fear of money. I don't for a rich family by any stretch of the imagination, but we were fine. And it just means that I'm not too risk averse when it comes to money. So as long as I've just got enough to hold myself down while I'm off following my following, I don't know, a sort of unicorn or something in some direction, I'm all right. So for me, the transitions are fine, apart from that burnout one, which was awful. And the reason the burnout was so bad was because it triggered all of my biggest fears. Like here I was fighting to prove that I wasn't weak. And then I was developing a physical and emotional condition that made me literally extremely weak. I had days when I couldn't, in fact, I had months when I couldn't get up a staircase without having to stop to pause for breath. At least once, so this was for somebody who prided themselves on fitness and strength was heartbreaking, but important. I can look back on it now, so I'm grateful for it, of course, but it took me a while to get there.
Going there in that place, could you just share whatever you're comfortable sharing, just some of the darker moments? Because it sounds like out of everything that you described in your story, that's the real dark bit. Because I always think we kind of have to hit the bottom sometimes in order to, like an arrow, you have to go backwards in order to fling forwards. So could you just go into some of the darker details of what you were experiencing and some of the things that you were thinking to yourself at the time, the beliefs, your model of the world, how you ended up from there? And then maybe there's always like a flashpoint, isn't there? There's always like for me, it was driving down the motorway at 100 miles an hour and binge eating on sweets. And I went, okay, you know what, maybe I need to go and do something about it. So could you kind of go into that part of where you were and the flashpoint that made you go, okay, I need help now?
Yeah. So there was a long and gradual descent before the rock bottom moment. And it was just my body sort of just gradually breaking down. By the time I hit my worst point, I was certainly struggling with chronic anxiety and depression, but physiologically I was also struggling in that I developed a load of allergies. My intestinal, what do they call it? Gastrointestinal?
No.
What the hell is the word I'm looking for? Anyway, yeah. My guts, they weren't playing ball. I couldn't sleep. I had terrible water retention and swelling. I had to wait half an hour every time I woke up in the morning because I couldn't walk on my feet because my feet were so swollen. And then I had this, all over body ache. I remember times when I would be reaching over to pick up just a handbag or a sports bag, and just the weight of the bag in my hand caused my whole arm to ache as if I'd just done, a load of weight exercises, and lactic acid was flooding my system. It was awful. It was awful. But the worst thing was that I needed to rest. Obviously, I needed to rest, but I couldn't bring myself to do it for any longer than was absolutely necessary. So I would rest for sort of 2 days, 3 days. And then I think, all right, now I reckon I'm okay. And I would be straight back down the gym like a relapsing drug addict, basically. I was completely addicted to the one thing that I really, really shouldn't have been doing. So that was the gradual descent. And then the rock bottom moment I often think of was, I don't know, I was lying on the sofa in my flat in Shoreditch where I lived with my sister and my partner and one other. And I was just staring at, I think I'd been watching Grand Designs or something on the TV. It was in the middle of the day and I'd just been the episodes had just been rolling on. And I was just staring at the TV, watching without watching it. And my partner at the time was trying to wake me up because I had to go to work where we both worked. My partner, it's Stu. He was talking to me and I couldn't respond. It was weird. It was almost like I could hear him, but I couldn't really hear him. I sort of wanted to respond, but then I also didn't want to. I just didn't. And I could see those two, those two people in that point were sort of the most important and immediate people in my life, my sister and my partner. And they were just drifting further and further and further away from me. So that was the moment when I couldn't, thing is, I was paralyzed then by it all. So I can't say, and then I thought, yes, I'm going to go and do something about it, because I didn't. Then I thought, I'm fucked. I don't think I'm ever going to be well. I don't think I'm ever going to be healthy again. I definitely can't do the things that I want to do in sport. That wasn't an aha moment. It was a giving up moment. I just didn't quite give up. Some point after that, one of my clients at the gym suggested a particular therapist to go and see, and I started thinking maybe it would be a good idea, and I moved out of that way. But yeah, that was also a gradual incline. I think people often talk about the sort of hero's journey as if there's this like crash and then this awareness and then I'm up and out, because in retrospect you can make it sound like that, knowing that it wasn't that way at the time. I'm not saying people are being duplicitous with it at all, but it's easy for us to look back and gloss over, just like the childbirth syndrome, gloss over the actual length of time and the actual struggle that was involved in it. But I know that there was a few years then when I really, really, really didn't like myself, and I didn't like being me, and I felt it was all incredibly unfair. That's what I felt.
And think about, because in those moments, I always think there are always little subtle signs, and I always try and think back to even my journey. If I'm, sometimes I mentor young athletes and give them, just like you did. In fact, there was a period of time when, when I first met you, I couldn't actually afford you, and you were able to support me and say, "Don't worry, then we can work on a pro bono rate," and that was life changing. And I pass that back on, and I try and help younger athletes. And I always look back at my experience and I always think, okay, what were the warning signs? Some of them for me were kind of like you, winning and not feeling satisfied. Yeah, but I was still dropping this, or yeah, I know, but I should have been better at this, or whatever. So I kind of try and pass on those little signs that I experience and see whether they resonate or not. So if you could analyze that experience, and if, let's say, maybe before you hit that point, what would you say the really subtle whispering warning signs were that you were leading towards that place?
That's a difficult question and a really good one. Let me give it some thought. Here's the tricky thing, is that I was missing all of the warning signs. That's why I got to the point of complete crash. Like if I'd actually been able to both hear and pay attention and honor the warning signs, maybe I wouldn't have crashed as badly as I did. But I wasn't prepared to do that, because it would have meant resting, and resting was not an option. But looking back, I can see that, so understanding, I wish I'd known that I was experiencing anxiety, because I don't know how I managed to miss that, really. I was heart pounding the whole time. If I would fall asleep, I was constantly trying to get sleep during the day because I wasn't sleeping at night. So if I'd fall asleep at lunchtime, I would often fall asleep for maybe 10, 15 minutes and then wake up as if I'd had a nightmare, heart racing, gasping for air. I hadn't had a nightmare though, it was just anxiety in my body. So that's something that I could have picked up on, and put two and two together about. Also that just slow numbing of all of my emotions, both positive and negative. So pushing the sense of achievement away, catching I guess that stuff I caught in my language eventually. So I started, there was one real eye-opening moment. I walked in to see a client that I was coaching at the gym, and he said, as he always did, "How are you going?" He was Australian. And I said, "Not too bad." And he just went, "Hazel, what does that even mean?" And I was like, oh, I don't really know. But then I realized that I always said it. It's like I didn't want to say, "Yeah, I'm great, thanks." But I also didn't want to say, "Actually, life's a bit crap." So I just went, "Yeah, not too bad." And I was just creating this sort of meh world around me. Nothing was good, nothing was bad. It was all just foggy. Oh yeah, brain fog is one of the symptoms I didn't mention earlier on. That was one of the worst ones, and sort of mouth coordination issues, not being able to speak, not being able to think clearly, horrible. So yeah, I caught it in my negative language, and I have since then got quite good at catching. I'll still catch limiting beliefs now. When I was writing my book, I caught myself saying, somebody said, how are you finding writing the book? And I said, I'm really enjoying it. I love writing all of the main chapters, but there's a story, the personal story bit at the beginning of each chapter. And I'm finding those bits hard because I'm just no good at creative writing. And I kind of went,
interesting.
Wait a minute.
Wait a minute.
Where did that come from? And when I noticed it, I remembered there was this time, I don't know how old I was, like maybe 14 or 15 in English class at high school. And I'd been asked to do a bit of creative writing about a friend of mine. And I tried to describe how beautiful my friend was. And I think I'd written something like eyes mounted on top of cheekbones or something like that. And it'd come back with red circle around it saying, sounds disgusting.
Wow.
And I was like, in that moment, I was like, oh, obviously creative writing is something I can't do. And until decades later, I was like, oh, hang on a minute, maybe I can question that. And so I guess, the noticing my language helped me to recognize those things when I started improving. And it's quite a laborious way of making a change, but really an important one to start. I stopped allowing myself from that point forward to say, yeah, not too bad. I just stopped allowing myself to complain about the unnecessary things. And that was a big part of how I sort of stepped out of victim.
And run through the journey of that recovery phase of pulling yourself out of that. Like you said, it wasn't a flashpoint. Okay, yeah, something's broken, cool, then I went and got it fixed. And often, we have to pace clients and we have to place people to help them come out those spots. Sometimes they're never going to believe that they can come out of where they are. This is just how I am. It's just who I am, If you understood my story, you'd get it. You'd understand that I am what I am and I have what I have. So could you just run through that journey of, okay, because you mentioned you'd given up and you didn't actually try for a while, and that can definitely happen. You kind of think, well, it's just the way it is. It's just the way things are. It's just the way who I am. So run me through that process of pulling yourself out of that, and then the rewards that were on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, so it was slow to start. I was slow to see change. I could start to see a sort of psychological and emotional change way before I started to see any change in my physical health. And this is one thing I think is probably pretty true for most people who manage to get the change going. Like we feel better with our thoughts, and our feelings feel better. And then we're like, okay, I can go out and do stuff again. But the body takes a while to catch up. Of course it does. It's, it's completely depleted. So that was the thing I struggled with quite a lot. Lots of heart breaking moments when I thought I was going to be all right and turned out I still wasn't. And I think anyone who's been recovering from a chronic issue will know the feeling of having a bad day and feeling certain that nothing has worked at all. I've gone back to the beginning entirely. Or maybe I've even taken, steps back even further than I'm worse than I was when I first started. It feels like you're not making any progress when, of course, you are. So I had a lot of that, lots and lots of ups and downs. But I think I kept going partly because I was interested, and partly because, well, I guess partly because I'm a fighter. I sort of always keep going in one way or another, even when it feels like a losing battle, which it did. And then there was a point when I'd made enough improvement for me to look back and go, oh yeah, actually things are considerably different now, even on the bad days. The bad days are way less bad than they used to be. So that, yeah, it was just kind of pressing on and letting myself really take responsibility for the little things that I could control. And the big things I could control. A lot of my progress is about learning to be honest and learning to set appropriate boundaries, especially around training. I had to suddenly become the person that was, if a coach said, right, let's finish with 50 burpees, and I knew that I should stop, I would say no, which I would never do before, because partly to do with the sort of respect of the coach and partly to do with not looking like I was incapable. But now I was just like, no. By this point, I was in mid to late 30s. No, early 30s. And so And so it was relatively easy. You know, a lot of the people in the boxing gym, as you would have been at the time, were quite young, and they were all just A, really fit, and B, really keen, and also still just saying yes sir, yes sir, yes sir to everything. And so they'd all be like just rushing off and doing their burpees, and I'd be standing there going, no, not today. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm going to go and get showered. But that had to learn to do that. Otherwise, every time I knew I was meant to do that and didn't listen to myself, I'd crash. So that was a really pretty tough lesson in how to make the change. Yeah, can't remember what your question was.
Okay, because that's a really interesting point that you touched on that, and I think it comes into that. It's almost the culture of fighting sports, which is to work and to work and to work. And if you're not working, if you're not winning, you have to train harder. And guess what? I think that really takes you to a level, and some of the lessons that you learn are just incredible. They really set you up for life. But also, if you're not careful, you can get stuck in that thinking. So here's an example. You know Russell. Russell is an absolute wizard. Russell Davis. He's one of my mentors, one of Hazel's mentors, I think, as well. Supervisor, and just a legend. And I was talking to him about this chronic need to work hard, and we've spoken about this as well. Is this chronic need to go and go and go and go and go? We explored that. It was actually a feeling of guilt, and we went. And this is a fascinating thing, because it's not just me that's had the same experience, but one of my best friends, an online fitness coach called Louis Calvert. He's who I started boxing with, and it was his uncle that trained us, a guy called Martin, my coach. And we both have this feeling around guilt and shame around not working 24/7 or working incredibly hard. And the moment upon which we were timeline therapy is basically going back to moments of when you were much younger that caused the line of code in your mind that makes you feel a certain way or have certain beliefs around the world. And we both went back to the same gym, almost the same moment, the same messages of that you have to work in order to be successful. You have to work in order to win, in order to provide. And it's almost like we think about fighting sports, a lot of them, particularly boxing, is a working class sport. So it's almost that hard labor always pays. It's that working class guilt. You must get up and go and work. And I think those environments are life-changing for so many kids, because the lessons and the good far outweighs the bad, in my opinion, of teaching kids to work hard and focus, and actually they can achieve, and building up their confidence and self-esteem. But we've also got to be careful, because it is those environments where that can lead to this chronic having to push through the pain barrier and working. And I think that's something I noticed. And when you mentioned that, because those environments encourage that. And I think for some people it's a great thing, but then also maybe as coaches, we need to educate boxing coaches and kickboxing coaches that there's got to be a balance, because actually sometimes less is more.
It's all about awareness, isn't it? You have to be, if you aren't aware of those kinds of drives and, you know, where they come from and how you use them, then they just feel like truth. So that the try hard drive, you know, I must be, if I'm not working, then I'm not okay. You know, if I'm not putting in some graft, if it's not difficult, then it's not worth it. That driver can lead to amazing achievements and a great work ethic, obviously, but if you aren't aware of it, it just feels like truth. And that was what it was like for me. You know, I've definitely got a try hard driver, and I know where it came from. It came from my dad, who comes from a family of hard workers. My dad was a scientist, but I think it was English, but both he and his brother were bad at English at school. I guess they might have been dyslexic, but it was way before the time when that was a thing. So my dad had to retake his English O level about 3 times, and I think his brother took it about 7 times to get through and do, you know, what they wanted to do. And my dad became a well-renowned geneticist. He won the rank prize. He had lunch with the Queen once because of his science. But you know, it wasn't because he just found it all easy. Not that's my mum. She was just sort of naturally adept at everything somehow. But my dad just had to put the graft in, and I was completely associated with him when I was younger. And he was also sporty, you know. So for me, you had to be working hard, you had to be sporty, you had to be strong, and unless I was proving that I was all of those things, I was not good enough. I was failing. I was probably disgusting, you know, untouchable, unless I was doing those things. Yes. So I had to get awareness of that. Once you can see it once you can actually see it for what it is, which is just a pattern, like an old learned pattern, you can start to choose when and when not to obey the urge to work hard. That doesn't make it easy, but then you have to start driving towards the ability to actually think, right, not today. And then you have to work on the communication skills that go with that to be able to tell other people not today. It's a process of learning that starts with awareness.
And let's have a look at some of your peak periods. If you could look at moments in your life where you were able to hit flow state, you're able to be fully engaged, you had that energy, you were having fun. Is there any particular times that comes up where you're like, you know what, actually, this period of my journey, my story, this was a really, really good time for me, whether that's external metrics, internal metrics, bit of both?
Yeah, I mean, they all, I can't think of a singular peak moment. If I was being forced to, I'd probably say now. But the thing about that is I'm sure that if you had asked me that at any other time in my life, I would still say now. Because, and there's all, different things, different areas that I've been in, but each one of them has had these wonderful flow moments in it, and each one of them has been interesting in its own way. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been there. The only point which was really difficult were those years of burnout, which helped me to reframe it. But what's great is that the things that have happened since the burnout, I guess they do eclipse the things that happened before the burnout, just purely because I'm able to be present for them more and I'm able to experience them more fully. But the thing is, before burnout, I was in my 20s and just, having fun, not being present, like getting drunk and staying up late, talking nonsense and figuring things out that way. And that's cool. Fine. That was fine for that time. I wouldn't want to do it now. But yeah, so I'd say at the moment is, if I was forced to pick one moment, I would say right now, because everything I'm doing at the moment feels so personally meaningful and there's also loads of different stuff for me to do. I'm not somebody I'm never someone who has one thing going on, never. I've always got fingers in different pies, because I like variety and I need variety. And right now, all of the different areas give me something really, really valuable, and they feel really important to me on a personal level. And it's all, everything coming together. You're saying earlier on that when you go through these different areas, it's difficult because a part of you has to die off. And I think that we need to let go of ideas about who we are in order to make those transitions. But I think really, rather than parts dying off, I think what it is about is those parts having to relinquish old ideas and to be repurposed and retrained in a new area. Because definitely everything that I've learned from every single part of my life is at play right now. So I'm glad those parts haven't gone, I need them all. And that's what I remember when I started working on the game on Betwixt, and I told a friend about it. And I said, yeah, it's a magical journey, which plays like a game, a video game, text-based, but it helps you to build mental resilience and self-awareness. And she said, isn't that basically just all the stuff you like in one situation? I was like, exactly that. Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. I don't know why I hadn't started doing it earlier. This is so ideal for me. I've always been into fantasy. I've always been into gaming, and I've always been into psychology. So it's perfect.
So would you say then, now where you have this meaning and this fulfillment and this joy and this fun, is that a case of listening to your internal feelings, whether that's your gut, your heart, as to, like you said, following your nose, so to speak? So I think we all have a part of us deep down that kind of knows what we want, and then we intellectualize it, or we rationalize it. We kind of ignore it, and we kind of beat it up. For me, whether that's been jobs, relationships, businesses, you kind of get stuck. So have you just been able to figure out, okay, all right, yeah, that's that part of me is interested in that. Then also, how do you stay focused and not chase so many things at once? So I guess my first question is that a case of you being able to listen to your heart, to your mind, to your nose, and go, oh, okay, that's what I'm interested in? And then secondly, how do you have a filter as to what to pick to take on?
Okay, great questions. So the first one is, yes, it's being able to listen, and it's also being able to trust. So I think the big difference between what I'm doing now in my life and what I was doing, say, back at art school or something, is my belief in my ability to do it. And again, just like with the boxing story at the beginning of our chat, this isn't an arrogant, I'm the best and I can do this better than anyone else. It's absolutely not. It's just this kind of gentle knowing that that yes, this is going to be tough and I want to do it, but I can handle the ups and downs. And also, I guess there's an element of growth mindset stuff in there as well. In that, if it doesn't work out, that's okay. So some of the pressure is removed. So I think yes, we need to be able to tune in and listen, but we need that belief which guards against the self-doubt, which otherwise stops us from going for what we want. So I think you're right that we have an idea of what we want. And yes, we rationalize that idea away or we ignore it. And I think one of the main reasons is because we're afraid if we actually say, I'm going to go and do this thing that I really want to do, then, what if I fail? Then I can't keep dreaming, because then then I'll really have to make a change. So belief is a big part of that. And now the filter thing is a harder question to answer. I've definitely got myself into situations, not, in the recent past, where I have, where I've taken on too much and I've been like, oh crap, I need to pull back. And I struggled a bit with my health last year. I don't know if it's long COVID. One of my doctors thinks it might be. It seems likely to me that it's not really bad. I definitely had COVID last year. I wasn't tested, but had all the symptoms. My partner lost his sense of smell for 2 months. So we're pretty sure we had it. And I had a couple of bad crashes last year where I couldn't really work out why, but I definitely knew that I needed to pull back on things. And I had to cancel some podcasts. I'd cancelled a workshop at one point. Ironically, the workshop was on boundaries. So I sent them a message apologizing, but saying, at least you can tell them that I'm not there because I'm respecting my boundaries. But yeah, so the filter thing, I guess, actually is partly about knowing your limits. So that's boundaries. And it's partly about being able to sort of measure them up against your real sort of honest sense of purpose. And I'm clearer on my sense of purpose than I've ever been. I'm sure I will get even clearer as I move forward. But that means that even though if I'm given 2 opportunities and I know I can't do both of them, so that's the limits thing, I will tune in that way to the 2 propositions and really listen to what my passion and my gut and sort of my authentic sense of meaning says about both of them. And that's been a big thing for me as well. I turned down a really well-paid job once because it was going to be in a corporate environment on a sales floor. It was a therapy job, but it was going to be in a corporate environment. And everyone was saying, you're crazy, just go and do it. It's just like 1 or 2 days a week and the money's amazing. And it would be very easy to ignore all of that other stuff, just say I'm going to go and make a load of money. But it wasn't me. And I've never looked back from that moment. It was definitely the right decision to make. So yeah, passion.
And if you think about Nietzsche's quote, he who has a why can bear any how. And I've been through periods where I've had a why, and I've been through periods where I haven't had a why, or that why has been a little bit blurry. And for a lot of people, particularly high performers, they can be driven by the fear of failure, the fear of not being good enough, which then leads to insane work outputs and therefore results, as well as ability and skill and hustle or whatever. But for them, some of those, they haven't necessarily figured out their why. And there's a few people here that are saying, okay, that's great for you, but I don't know. How do I figure out my purpose? It's quite a big question. It's quite a hard question. Sometimes we don't want to ask ourselves that. It's easier for us to just numb out or be distracted by life or put ourselves into work. But what is like a really small step forward you could recommend for someone to just sort of peek through the door as to looking at purpose or trying to figure out the why side of what they do?
I think, yeah. So actually, Russell, as you mentioned earlier on, is my supervisor, and he once helped me with purpose. And one of the things he started asking me about was what made me angry in the world. What gets you arguing passionately? What gets you shaking your fist? And there are lots of things that get me like that. You know, I could list off a whole load of political stuff. I could list off a whole load of personal stuff. But we boiled it down to, you know, to the real key elements that got my blood boiling. And then he asked me a very big but very simple question, which is, you know, what does the world need more of in order for that particular problem to begin being solved? And that, I think, you know, for me, the answer to that question was authentic, empathetic connection between human beings. And it will be something along those lines for lots of people, but isn't always. So I've worked with musicians who, you know, the thing that really gets their blood boiling is how the music industry is reducing people's ability to be creative because it's constantly reproducing the same music over and over. The answer to the question of what does the world need more of for that to improve is very different. So depending on what our area is and depending on where our passions lie, we have different answers to that question, and we'll always have different particular words and different meanings for those words. So I think ask yourself that question. And if, for me, if anything that I'm doing that brings more of that sort of sense of solution to any kind of area, is going to feel meaningful. It's not all of it, because like I said earlier on, I could easily be presented with 2 jobs and they could both have the opportunity to bring people together, or the opportunity to help people sort of explore the idea of empathy more. Fine, I'd still have to choose between them. But then on top of that, I'd be adding in stuff that I enjoy, you know, which ones align most with my passions, you know, which one feels most creative to me. That's a big thing for this. Which one feels most different? I like variety. And also which play to my skills. You know, not I don't think we should do things just because we're good at them, because I mean, that's probably why so many people are saying something like a sport for a long time. You know, if I'm good at this and I can win medals, I must need to be here. Not necessarily true, but we don't want to be doing things that, you know, that don't feel like they align with our particular skill sets that we've built up either. So those 3 things: something that makes a difference, that feels personally meaningful, something that you enjoy and plays to your values, and something that plays to your skills.
That's a really great point, and it takes me back to a memory in my journey working on that. And I remember you asked me what made me angry, and I was actually going through some of our emails recently to basically find that statement. And the things I remember, and I've got it all written down, I'll re-forward it to you after this. You're like, it's fascinating. It was back in 2018. And the things that were making me angry were injustice and unfairness and closed-mindedness and people not getting fair opportunities. I'm a really big believer of equality of opportunity, that everybody should get a shot. And I think we boiled down my purpose sentence to: my life's purpose is to use my skill for communicating and my love of the game in order to help others win. Now that was in 2018, May 21st. And it's interesting because we're now in 2021, May 28th. And actually, if you look at the job that I'm doing now, obviously with Total Mental Performance, a coaching service for high performers to help them work on manage challenging emotions and self-limiting beliefs for peak performance. It's actually exactly what I'm doing. And the identity statement was: I'm a person who facilitates winning. So it's amazing, actually, just reflecting now on how you asked me that question, what made me angry, and how over that period of time, as I've identified that, my subconscious has started looking for opportunities for me to become that person that facilitates winning, become that person that, you know, helps others and uses my skill for communicating and love of the game to help others win. So I'm really glad you mentioned that point, and that just a little light bulb moment. Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing. When you do that process, and it does take some time, it's not a quick and easy thing. When you do it and you get the sentence right, at the end of it, it really sings. Like I always say this to clients when I'm working with this, I usually will spend a full session on it, and then I'll send them away to get the sentence right at the end. Not that the sentence is important, but the process of refining what goes into the sentence is of course important, because it makes you weigh things up and choose what actually has to be there and what doesn't really. But when you've managed to do that, you look at the sentence, you go, yeah, that's me. That right there, that's me. And that's why I enjoyed this, and this, and this. And it's why I didn't actually enjoy that, and that. So it becomes a brilliant sort of barometer, really, for making important decisions, especially about work, but about anything when it comes down to it. My sentence is around creative and facilitating creative and emotional aha moments that bring about self-acceptance and empathy. And so when I look at the game, I'm building completely creative fantasy game, which is designed to help people self-reflect in a way that they come to their own conclusions, and learn to accept themselves better. I mean, it's exactly the same as yours, and it works to it perfectly. But that is one of the beauty about getting the sentence right. It does need to be quite broad, right? It's, if somebody said their sentence was, to find the exact genetic structure of this particular crop so that they could feed people in Africa or something, that sounds like a worthy mission, but it's not purpose. Because what if they do manage to do that?
And what?
Then what? and why did they want to do that in the first place? They haven't answered that question. So that's why those sentences are likely to fit to a lot of things, because they are intentionally broad, but that's okay.
Yeah, amazing. I got my final question, which I ask every guest, is what does the phrase total mental performance mean to you?
You didn't send this question through by email, so I haven't had to think about it. So let me think about it now. I mean, I don't know really. Mental performance to me means having awareness of what's going on inside our heads. As somebody who had absolutely zero of that now has, an all right amount of that. Everyone can still have more. I know the importance of that because it helps you to sort of begin separating fact from fiction in terms of what you're perceiving. Total means everything. So for me, I would say this means a holistic look at what's going on inside, with a leaning towards getting things to function right, because that's where performance is, and help people win, I guess, if you come back to your mission statement, your purpose statement.
Amazing. Well, look, Hazel, thank you so much, not just for jumping on the podcast, but for everything you've ever done for me. I can honestly say I wouldn't be stood here doing what I'm doing without you. So thank you. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at hazel.gale.therapy. Gale is Gale, like the wind. You can find me on Twitter as Hazel Gale or Medium. You can find the game at betwixt.life and on the App Store if you search Betwixt. You can find Clementine on the App Store if you search Clementine. It's sort of pink with the red. It's pink with the red C. That's it.
Amazing.
You can vote my website, hazelgale.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hazel. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you for speaking to our audience.
Thank you very much for having me.